Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon for you in Europe, but good morning and good evening if you are in another corner of the world. And thank you very much for being here with us for this part of our program of the intersessional meeting of the Anti-Personal Mind Ban Convention. Today, we will be having this panel discussion on safety and protection of mine survivors in situation of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of technical things. First, please note that this panel is simultaneously interpreted into Arabic, English, French, Russian, and Spanish, as well as into International Sign Language. Thank you very much to our interpreters. Should you have any technical issue during the panel, please send a message in the private chat to moderator, which you can find on the top left after clicking on the blue private chat envelope. And moderator is the technical term used by Interprefy for technical support. Secondly, I would like to thank participants that have already sent questions beforehand and remind all participants that should you have any question, you can also use the chat. After all the panelists have presented, we will invite them to respond to some of your questions. I'm Tancredi Francese. I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative of Italy to the Conference on Disarmament here in Geneva. And I'm also the chair of the Committee on Victim Assistance of the Anti-Personal Mind Ban Convention. I have the pleasure of working together with my colleagues from the permanent missions of Chile, Sweden, and Thailand, members of the committee. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to moderate this important panel on behalf of the committee today. And I'm the pleasure to be here today with a number of experts. Let me present them to you. I would like to welcome Senor Oscar Javier Cisa Moreno from Colombia. He works in the Office of Social Promotion in the Ministry of Health and Social Protection, Colombia. Then we have Mr. Muafak Al-Kafaji from Iraq, working at the Iraqi Alliance of Disability Organizations. He is also a member of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, ICBL. It's a real honor for me to welcome also Senora María Soledad Cisterna, that many of you know, since she is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Disability and Accessibility. A warm welcome to María Soledad Cisternas. Then we have Mark Slot from the International Committee of the Red Cross. He's the Physical Rehabilitation Program Coordinator. And also we have Ms. Sophie Hallin, Technical Unit Coordinator, working for Handicap International in Iraq. Allow me to say a few words about the panel and its objectives before I invite the experts to speak, but I will be very brief because I don't want to steal time to the panelists. As many of you know, while the convention's achievements have been significant in many ways, unfortunately, each year, thousands of people continue to fall victims to mines, and in most cases, they acquire severe impairments, such as loss of limbs, for example. Landmine survivors often require continued support following their accident, and as every person with disabilities, they are among the most vulnerable population in situations of humanitarian emergencies and humanitarian crisis. Unless appropriate mitigation and response measures are considered in a timely manner, landmine survivors, like other persons with disabilities, can be disproportionately affected in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Therefore, the committee holds this panel today to help increasing our knowledge and understanding on why safety and protection of landmine survivors and other persons with disabilities are so important and how they can be addressed. Given the ongoing unfortunate situation with the COVID-19 outbreak, the panel will also briefly discuss the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic among persons with disability. We are glad that many people, including some of our panelists, have been actively raising awareness on impact of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities over these past months. It is important to remember that safety and protection of landmine survivors and other persons with disability is a matter of concern in many different types of event, be it natural or human-made, such as protracted conflicts, tsunamis, landslide, floods, hurricanes, storms, earthquake, but for more important and more relevant for our work, landmines and other explosive remnants words. State parties to the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention are committed to address this challenge, and a specific action has been included in the Oslo Action Plan, and I refer specifically to Action 40. These commitments adds another international framework concerned with safety and protection of persons with disabilities, such as the well-known Article 11 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and UN Security Council Resolution 2475. But now it's time for the panelists to address you, and I'm very thankful to all the experts that have kindly accepted our invitation to contribute to this important discussion today. I would like now to invite Senor Oscar Javier Cisa Moreno to share Colombia's experience in ensuring the safety and protection of landmine survivors and other persons with disabilities in this situation of risks and emergency. So the floor is yours, Oscar. Sorry, I think there is just a small technical problem with Oscar connecting from Colombia. Please bear with us just a couple of minutes. We're very glad to have the possibility to listen to an interesting experience because Colombia has been very active in this domain in the not only in the past months but in the past years, I will say. So I really think that they will have an interesting experience to share with us. I think Oscar. Just not to lose the time of the panel, maybe we can go to the next panelist and then we can come back to Oscar. So let me start inviting Mr. Muafak Al-Kafaji from Iraq to share his perspective on behalf of landmine survivors and persons with disabilities. Muafak, are you online? Perfect, thank you.
الو تسمعيني؟ الو الو الو
Yeah, okay, you can go ahead.
ستارتنج الو
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
يس اسمعك آه، الان تسمعيني؟ الان تسمعيني؟ الصوت ضعيف آه، عالي الو الان الصوت ضعيف الصوت احسن الان اوكي آه، اوكي نعم شكرا جزيلا الصوت واضح الآن؟ الصوت؟ لا ريستارت. تسمعيني؟ أوكي. السيد تانكريدي فرانسيس. نعم.
Mr. Francesi, Deputy Permanent Representative of Italy to the Disarmament Conference, Chair of the Victims Assistance Committee to the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. Yes, we can hear the speaker, but the sound is not excellent. I'll start again. The sound is better now. The interpreters are now ready to go. Mr. Francesi, Deputy Representative of Italy to the Disarmament Conference and Chair of the Committee on Victim Assistance on the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. Ladies and gentlemen, representatives of states, parties, delegates, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to today discuss with you the situation of mine survivors and persons with disabilities, as well as their needs in emergency situations, because these individuals are more exposed to risks than others whenever they have very special and intense needs. They require special care, which during a crisis may be interrupted. They may not have access to this service. It is clear that mine survivors and persons with disabilities in risks and humanitarian emergencies or countries in crises are going through a very difficult time. They face up to a number of difficulties because there is not proper planning in advance which allows us to respond to their needs. However, that is set out and within the relevant international conventions, such as Article 6 of the Ottawa Convention and Article 11 of the CRPD. These international instruments request that state parties guarantee protection, rehabilitation, reintegration, and the right to life of all those who survive and live with handicaps, particularly in emergency situations. A number of countries do not have sufficient resources in their budget to guarantee survivor protection and protection for persons with disabilities in humanitarian emergencies. It also becomes almost impossible to guarantee protection for these individuals in line with the Oslo Action Plan. It is worth pointing out that civil society organizations and survivors organizations, as well as organizations for persons with disabilities, have proven that they can play a key role in humanitarian emergencies because these organizations are in constant contact with public bodies who are in charge of passing on the necessary information to individuals. They can also make very useful suggestions and propositions. They also lead in many initiatives which are entrusted to persons with disabilities or survivors, women with disabilities, have proven their ability to contribute very effectively to this work in line with the guidelines for risk evaluation, and also by participating in the provision of emergency resources. In Iraq, there is still a large number of explosive remnants of war, both from mines and cluster munitions, which is creating a growing number of victims. This despite national efforts and international humanitarian demining support. I would also like to restate my call to the international community to support national efforts in order to clear the country of this scourge which is creating a larger number of victims every year. The consequences of this situation weigh on our ability to achieve the SDGs in a number of fields. The difficulties linked to demining have increased along with the number of victims. This is as a result of terrorism and large seizures of land in Iraq by terrorist groups. Since 2014, for a period of 3 years, this was the case, and finally national efforts were able to free Iraqi territory from these terrorists. On the regional level, armed conflict have had a direct impact on survivors' lives and on the lives of persons with disabilities. These individuals continue to be exposed to a number of dangers because they have lost basically all access to a number of services in countries such as Yemen, Syria, and Libya. This is also the case in a number of parts of the occupied Palestinian territories. We would once again exhort all state parties to bring an end immediately to this conflict and to move towards dialogue for peace, to bring this situation to an end, a situation which is creating an increasing number of victims. For the last 4 months, the world is under the yoke of a humanitarian pandemic, which is unprecedented in nature. COVID-19 has created additional difficulties and has, for survivors and persons with disabilities, created a greater environment of suffering. These individuals are more exposed to risk than others. There are approximately 1 billion individuals who suffer from a disability around the world, and the majority of them need specific health services, specialized care, specialized equipment, and resources and means which allow them to continue to enjoy a normal life. All the same, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, these individuals have found it more difficult to access these necessary services. In addition, rehabilitation centres which normally dealt with these individuals have been turned into quarantine centres, and their usual patients were not able to attend. Persons with disabilities were left to one side. Prior planning was necessary, and it should have borne in mind their needs and the protection of their private lives, as well as the need to provide healthy living conditions and access to the necessary specific equipment, as well as access to medical centres. Access to healthy nutrition is very important to support and bolster their immune systems. COVID-19 continues to pose problems around the world. Survivors and persons with disabilities find themselves in trouble when it comes to accessing information. All parties concerned are urged to engage in information campaigns and advisory campaigns against COVID-19 in line with the needs of these communities, such as providing information in sign language, braille print, texts, and accessible transport to make sure that these individuals can reach the specialized areas or be taken away from places they need to be moved from. I would just like to point out that girls with disabilities, particularly those who live in far-flung and rural areas, are particularly affected. We would need to make specific provision to protect these girls from the dangers of COVID-19, for example, visiting them at home to fully understand their situation, their needs, and to allow them to live healthily. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Muafak, for reminding us of an important issue, which is the participation and inclusion of land survivors and other persons with disabilities. It's something that is indicated in Action 41 of the Oslo Action Plan, and it's our goal to ensure the full inclusion and effective participation of my victims and their representative organization in all the matters that affect them. After having heard your experience, I look forward to listen now to the Colombian experience. So I invite Oscar Javier Cisa Moreno to take the floor. I hope that now it's everything okay with the connection. It's very good that we can host people both from Colombia and Iraq to such different experiences and also very far countries of the world. Hopefully the system will functioning now. Otherwise, we can still wait for Oscar Javier to solve its problem with the connection and give the floor to Miss Maria Soledad Cisternas, who will share his perspective on safety and protection, especially in relation in the notion of mitigation and preparedness in situation of humanitarian emergency and in situation of protracted conflicts. Maria Soledad Cisternas, can you connect yourself? It's working.
Thank you very much. Welcome and thank you, Chairperson, for having given me the floor. I was asked to look at the legal framework applying to those living with disabilities in humanitarian emergency situations. First of all, and as I was hearing from the previous speaker, the CRPD guarantees the right to life for all those living with disabilities and to adopt measures to guarantee this right. In agreement with this, state parties should adopt all international human rights instruments and international humanitarian instruments to guarantee that security and protection of all those living with disabilities in risk situations can be guaranteed, be it humanitarian emergencies, natural disasters, or armed conflicts. I would like to raise that in light of the CRPD, which considers persons with disabilities as people suffering impairments who have to overcome barriers to engage in society, persons who have survived landmines are individuals with disabilities and therefore are covered under the legal framework of the CRPD. We might then wonder how armed conflicts or pandemics can have an impact on this. Now, I'm going to talk about the pandemic, and you might well wonder why, and that's because in this case, the enemy, if you like, is invisible. This is someone we can't pinned down. We don't know the exact effects of this enemy, nor how long he's going to be around. So the usual methods no longer apply, and this is why the pandemic is such a serious threat for the world. Within the United Nations, we have been working a great deal on this issue, including on standard setting for humanitarian action, focusing on persons with disabilities. And I see that other speakers on the panel will be speaking about this. But I would like to stress that we have been striving to implement the legal framework through the Secretariat General's declarations in his policy briefs and in the guidelines from the UNHCR on human rights. With regard to accessibility and disability in my role as special envoy, I have delivered a number of statements on a variety of topics which affect persons with disabilities and mine survivors. I would like to speak about a couple of them because I see that I don't have an awful lot of time. First of all, everything related to the right to life. Because we have the dilemma of the last mechanical ventilator. Well, this is a dilemma. You might wonder what's happened. There's situations where persons with disabilities have been, if you like, excluded from efforts to maintain life. And we have to be clear here. Persons with disabilities have exactly the same rights to right for life to be prolonged as anyone else. And if we deny them this, then we're looking at a violation of their human rights. We're looking at discrimination. And no internal national regulation could protect such a violation. No life is worth more than any other life. And given such equality, no triage or selection or sorting of patients can be based on whether or not that person has a disability. For example, there may be a legal fault where the Supreme Court has said that disability is considered as a condition rather than a sickness. But this should not have an impact on their access to mechanical ventilators. If you were to deny individuals such access, that would be degrading treatment, which is similar to a form of torture. With regard to healthcare, you have to make sure that this is accessible and that the information and communication is also accessible, that the staff involved are trained and specialized in attending to the needs of persons with disabilities with regard to the support that they require in terms of legal capacity and in terms of applying reasonable adjustment or adaptation. Mental health is also important, and attention must be paid to online psychological consultations and to consider the needs of persons with disabilities. How many individuals with disabilities have been infected by and subsequently died from such situations? How do we consider restrictions to personal liberty in quarantine when there are persons with disabilities who need exceptions to be made, for example, to go out onto the street for a number of moments just to reduce their stress or their depression or anxiety? So there are a great number of examples. The exercise and enjoyment of rights, such as, for example, teleworking, access to distance education. In what way are states, as the main people responsible for the elimination of barriers, how are they providing technological assistance to persons with disabilities and, of course, to survivors? In what way is social security addressing and helping persons with disabilities and survivors who do not have their own income? How do they provide them with subsidies and emergency income? I would like to point out, as I move towards my conclusion, that states parties should provide a fully inclusive and participative solution to persons with disabilities through their representative organizations related to this pandemic, and this is essential. You may wonder why. Well, that's because in addition to providing support and supporting the human rights of the individuals, I want to stress that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development has not been paused because of the pandemic. Accountability will still apply. How states were able to mitigate and address the needs of persons with disabilities will still be considered. To conclude, I would like to point out that United Nations Secretary General in his policy brief has clearly stated that persons with disabilities must be at the center of the public policy design during the pandemic under the axes of non-discrimination, intersectionality, participation, data and statistics, and accountability. We must not forget that nobody should be left behind in the 21st century when the 2030 agenda is in place and the CRPD is also in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Soledad, for your words. They're always very pertinent. And you made a clear point about the importance of inclusivity, because all states must take this kind of situation into account, given that not just in terms of the pandemic, but all situations of emergency and crisis, states must be prepared and always place the person at the center. And I think that is the key point in your statement, and we thank you very much for it. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Let me now invite Mr. Mark Slot from the International Committee of the Red Cross to tell us about the ICRC experience and any recommendations that Mark, you might have with regards to safety and protection of persons with disabilities. We are very grateful to the ICRC for its extremely important work, especially for providing much needed rehabilitation support to landmine survivors and other persons with disabilities in mine affected countries. So Mark, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good day, good morning to all excellencies, to the participants, listeners, to fellow panelists. I would like to share with you ICRC's view on safety and protection of mine survivors in situation of risks and humanitarian emergencies. The presentation will address legal frameworks and its expected governmental actions and what needs to be done to address the needs, and it will also involve people with disability and especially mine victims. It will also inform you on what ICRC is doing in its physical rehabilitation program together with its partners in more than 42 countries, serving more than 23,300 mine victims and 414,800 plus people with disability every year. Core rules of international humanitarian law, IHL, can be implemented in an inclusive manner that takes the specific perspective, capacities, and needs of mine survivors and other persons with disabilities into account. This stresses the complementarity to the Convention on the Rights of Disabilities, including its Article 11, and ensures that mine survivors and other persons with disabilities do not face an aggravation of their existing impairment or a secondary impairment. International humanitarian law ensures protection of mine survivors or other persons with disabilities as civilians or persons hors de combat from conflict-specific risks related to the conduct of hostilities in armed conflict. Parties to armed conflict, both state and non-state, have obligations to take all feasible precautions to prevent or minimize incidental harm to civilians or persons hors de combat as a result of combat. These obligations can be interpreted in a disability-inclusive manner. Advanced warnings are communicated in a way that it is accessible to persons with diverse impairments, for example, leaflets in braille, large print alerts through app-specific software would leave enough time for people with disability and especially mine victims to leave the area. Evacuation plans make specific provisions for people with disabilities and also mine victims. Preparedness plans are often referred to in the context of natural disasters, but should be extended to the specific challenges of armed conflict situations too. Evacuation operations take into account, for instance, the need that mine survivors or other people with disability might have to be accompanied by a support person, and that, for instance, there may be additional requirements to transport assistive devices such as wheelchairs. In any additions, measures affecting mine survivors and other people with disability, IHL, International Humanitarian Law, is enriched through the CRPD and weapon treaties containing victim assistance because the CRPD and weapon treaties explicitly require meaningful participation. Overall, this is a clear change to how we have operated traditionally by requiring full participation of mine victims, of people with disability in humanitarian responses at all stages. This is what CRPD and weapon treaties like Convention Cluster Munition bring explicitly, where general IHL and humanitarian principles are only implicitly through notions of humanity and respect for the dignity of people we want to serve. Inherent in this is the understanding that people with disabilities are agents and may shape those responses and know best, as also mentioned in the Oslo Action Plan, Action 41. Now, ICRC's new 2030 vision on disability inclusion and its aligned components. To design and deliver inclusive, person-centric programs and services that are accessible to persons with physical, psychosocial, intellectual, and sensory disabilities and promote their protection, safety, and respect for their dignity. The ICRC will consistently seek and be guided by the perspectives of people with disability in affected communities in the design and delivery of programs and services. To this purpose, the ICRC will ensure that people with disabilities participate in the design of humanitarian activities and programming, build knowledge and capabilities to produce and share reliable sex, age, and disability disaggregated data on the number, needs, and capacities of mine victims. Remove or advocate for the removal of barriers that affect mine victims' equal participation and access to services, ensures the physical infrastructure that is part of ICRC's humanitarian services and facilities is accessible. Build accountability mechanisms that are accessible to persons with disabilities among the affected communities. Improve understanding of social dynamics within the community that affected persons with physical, psychosocial, intellectual, and sensory disabilities from different gender, age, and other diversity groups to improve our response or help to avoid triggering unintended negative consequences. To continue to deliver and develop targeted physical rehabilitation services as done in the last 40 years since its existence. The ICRC will deliver high quality, equitably accessible and sustainable rehabilitation services to all persons with disabilities and drive toward their participation in all elements of society. To achieve this, the ICRC Physical Rehabilitation Program adopts a multidisciplinary team approach, adopts a person-centric focus, aims to strengthen local and national rehabilitation systems, work collaboratively with its global network of national and local partners. And now, please listen up, as I would like to give you a take-home message. Please keep in mind, mine victims, as people with disabilities, have a lifelong need for assistive technology and rehabilitation services provided by rehabilitation professionals. Hence, the official recognition of rehabilitation professionals such as prosthetists, orthotists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, language therapists is essential to have a well-qualified workforce that has the capacity to provide rehabilitation services, as mentioned in the action plan, in the Oslo Action Plan, Action 32 and 37. Further, each country needs to have a national rehabilitation coordination mechanism, and last but not least, a well-functioning supply chain that distributes components for prosthesis, orthosis, walking aids, and wheelchairs, and facilitates the importation of goods that are not available on the local markets, so that mine victims and people with disabilities have access to service and can be served. And the credo, nothing about us without us, is as important as ever, so that we can achieve the ultimate goal of rehabilitation to include people with disability as full equal members into society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. We will take this lesson with us, and thank you again for all the work that the ICRC does in many parts of the world for the victims of landmines. I think that based on our experience, we really have something important to learn, and we will thank you for being able to be in this panel, but also to be at the disposal of the victim assistance community. In the past years, it's not something new. So thank you very much, Mark. And now,
You're welcome.
thank you. Now we will hear from Sophie Allin. Sophie Allin will share HI's experience in working in affected countries in relation to safety and protection of persons with disabilities, including landmine survivors. Sophie will also tell us about a new guideline developed by the UN on the safety and protection of persons with disability in humanitarian action. Thank you for being with us, Sophie.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for your time listening to me today. So today I want to share some field experiences and make reference to the development of the new IS guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. So as some of my colleagues have already highlighted, during conflict, natural disaster and subsequent displacement, persons with disabilities, including explosive ordnance survivors, are more likely to lose access to their caregivers and face additional health complications and costs. As compared with other segments of the population, they're more likely to face targeted violence, they're more likely to be excluded from consultation processes and from their communities due to stigma. Humanitarian crises are likely to place persons with disabilities at risk of severe financial poverty, increasing their risk of unsafe coping mechanisms and income-seeking behaviours. The IS guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action were developed as a tool to help humanitarian organisations, governments, and other civil society groups to translate their legislative commitments into concrete actions that would ensure the safety and protection of persons with disabilities, including survivors, through improved data collection and analysis, fostering meaningful participation, addressing barriers, and developing response capacities. I've now worked across 3 large-scale emergencies in South Sudan, the Philippines, and Iraq, or even an Iraqi dinar for every time I heard.
Sophie, if you can please talk a bit slowly, because I'm receiving a request from the interpreters for you. Thank you.
I've now worked across 3 large-scale emergencies in South Sudan, the Philippines, and Iraq. If I received $1 or even an Iraqi dinar for every time I heard, we agree it's important, we know there are needs, we want to provide inclusive services, but we don't have the time, the space, the resources, or the technical expertise right now, we'll consider it later, I'd be a very wealthy lady. However, inclusion is a shared responsibility, and I want to share the wealth. I also want to share some practical experiences of the challenges faced and how HI has actioned some of the key recommendations. First, as a humanitarian community, we need to improve the quality of sex, age, and disability disaggregated data. In addition to victim and accident data, the Washington Group questions provide a field-tested methodology that ensure disability disaggregated data collection. In Iraq, through advocacy at cluster level, field awareness and support, we've witnessed an increase in sex, age, and disability disaggregated data collection. But data alone, unfortunately, isn't enough. We also need to increase our capacity to analyse and translate this data into concrete and routine actions that plan for services to support communities. So when we address WASH needs for women, through data analysis, it enables us to simultaneously address WASH needs for women with disabilities. Second, we want to foster meaningful participation of persons with disabilities, including survivors. It's essential for an inclusive humanitarian response that meets their needs. To understand the specific challenges faced, persons with disabilities need to know their rights. They need to be represented and they need to be involved in community consultation processes. And they also need to be involved when programs are being implemented. In Iraq, we've supported the establishment of community safety committees. These are gender and disability inclusive, and their role is to develop safety plans that promote a safer and a more inclusive environment. In risk education, we engage in participatory IEC material design. They ensure youth, gender, and persons with disabilities are represented. This promotes tailored messaging on the risks of explosive ordnance in Iraq, but also enables us to simultaneously raise awareness and promote inclusion. Additionally, we train all HI staff, volunteers, and community focal points on disability inclusion. This ensures that everyone's contributing and promoting a more inclusive society. Third, we want to increase access to services. This increases the protection of populations with whom we're working by addressing physical, attitudinal, and institutional barriers. For example, during the initial phase of the response in South Sudan, it was realised that the pre-positioned latrine slab stocks were not fully accessible. Providing technical advice to WASH actors and working alongside WASH engineers, we were able to quickly adapt and have larger latrine cubicles. After consultations, we observed not only additional advantages for persons with disabilities, but also for pregnant women and women with young children. And now, last but not least, we want to consider how to develop response capacity. In Iraq, HI's worked with the relevant authorities to ensure they meet their commitment to provide services. Secondary and tertiary healthcare services are frequently less prioritised and under-resourced. Often this results in poor quality or unavailable rehabilitation services. It requires people to travel long distances to reach services such as rehabilitation, physiotherapy, prosthetics, and orthotics. Training rehab professionals, promoting awareness on management of chronic conditions, as well as supporting regulation and decentralisation of services, has been shown to improve government capacity to respond to identified needs and increase access to specialised services. Working with organisations for persons with disabilities and survivors' organisations is also key. For instance, during the recent COVID response, we've worked with organisations for persons with disabilities in Iraq. We've worked to ensure that messaging is provided in varied and accessible formats. In addition, working alongside these community-based organisations, we've been successful in developing awareness campaigns on inclusive services, access to education and employment, and reducing stigma associated with disability. The provision of advocacy training packages to persons with disabilities ensures that they're not only able to ask the humanitarian community to meet their needs, but also able to provide advice on how to do this. The government's responded by funding and releasing hygiene awareness messaging with sign translation. Easy read pictorial guidance and radio messages have also been developed and shared. Before I conclude, I need to stress one important thing. Collection and analysis of data, meaningful participation, removal of barriers, and the development of response capacity will only be possible if we have sustained technical and financial commitment from donors and the wider humanitarian community. If we look at the Mine Action budget, for example, we notice an overall reduction of funding for victim assistance with the only exception of 2018. We know that humanitarian development and human rights envelopes might contribute towards victim assistance and disability inclusive efforts. As to whether these broader efforts are reaching those victims and other people with disabilities is lacking. This must change to ensure accountability to the affected populations. Together, with sustained funding and commitment from all stakeholders, we could create an enabling barrier-free environment. The IAS guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action set out a roadmap for a humanitarian response that leaves no one behind. Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you very much, Sophie. It's very much appreciated. But well, through you, we would like to thank all the organization, Humanity and Inclusion, for the brilliant work you do in really every corner of the world. And you are a very much appreciated contributor in the work of the Victim Assistance Committee. So now we are running a little bit out of time. We have less than 10 minutes, but since we have received a lot of comments and questions in the chat or through private messages, I would like to pick some of these comments and questions, and I'll start with a question directed to Maria Soledad Cisternas. If you can connect again. The question is by our colleague from Mozambique, which says that evidence-based studies suggest that humanitarian emergencies will be recurrent in the near future on account of increase in frequencies and magnitude of natural disasters linked to climate changes and global warming. To Maria Soledad Cisternas, if you can answer, what are the best strategies for states to cater for safety and protection needs of mine survivors in situation of risk and emergency in the context of Action 4 of the Oslo Action Plan?
Thank you very much for your question. Very wise question. I think it's very important because this reminds me of a very important experience and initiatives to, it's been 2 or 3 years now, they've been aiming to compile all this experience so that humanity has tools, elements with which it can defend itself in other crises, pandemics, or humanitarian emergencies. I am absolutely optimistic. I think that this pandemic took us by surprise. In developing countries and developed countries, we see difficulties of different types, but we all have them, and we see how, when we work together under a set of criteria, for example, to measure the impact on individuals' human rights, and particularly the most vulnerable sectors of the population, such as persons with disabilities, survivors, and how states should respond. So I think that this is a very crucial time if, as humanity, we are to be ready to stand up to emergencies in the future. Therefore, I think that data collection and statistics is a very valuable element with a view to having some central library, if you like, to refer to in the future. So my message is one of optimism, and I hope, of course, we never have to resort to such a resource. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Soledad. Thank you particularly for your optimism. I think it's very important to build trust in our work.
Well, we are trying another time to connect with Colombia. Maybe Jasmine, it's online, wants to take the floor. Let's try. No, I think we have no luck with Colombia this afternoon. I'm very sorry, but the presentation that Colombia had sent to us before will be uploaded in the web page of the ICU. So this is at least a possibility to have the Colombian contribution. Well, if I may continue with a few questions, I think that I will also have a question for Sophie. Sophie, if you are online again, please could you expand more on experiences addressing how organizations and states could be more accountable to affected population? I think this is very important. Sophie, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Yes, so I think one of the factors, I'll try and speak slower. One of the factors that I think is really important to ensure that we're accountable to populations is to ensure that we include organisations of persons with disability and survivor groups, if they don't exist or aren't pre-existing, to support them to be established. And then to ensure that they're involved in the processes such as community-based assessments, planning processes, ensuring that if organisations are doing assessments, that these organisations are consulted, so that information is provided in multiple and accessible formats, that organisations actively reach out and facilitate participation, so potentially adapting the environment in communication methods, and then involving them to make sure that the messages that they want heard to their communities are heard. I don't know if you want me to go further or deeper into the topic, or...
Well, thank you very much, Sophie. I think that we have almost exhausted the time at our disposal for this afternoon. But in conclusion, I think that we have received a lot of message, and I would like to thank especially the panelists for their presentation, but also all the participants that were quite active in the chats and in the messages that we have received. So thank you very much. I hope that you all enjoyed the discussion as much as we did and added onto your understanding of the significance of safety and protection of landmine survivors and persons with disabilities in situation of risk and emergency. I really want to thank the fellow members of the Committee on Victim Assistance, because this has been a team effort. This is me speaking as a moderator, but I really want to stress the importance of the work we have conducted together in the committee with my colleagues from Chile, Sweden, and Thailand. And thank you very much to the support, the precious support of the ISU. Without the contribution and the support of Juan Carlos and Firot, I think that the committee will be lost. So thank you very much. And we will continue raising awareness in this regard. I will provide support to state parties with victim assistance committees, which is the main point of the work of our committee. I look forward to seeing some of you, hopefully in person, at the 18th MSP of the Convention in November in Geneva, where the committee plans are to hold a victim assistance expert meeting as well. So it will be another opportunity for us to reconvene our community. As I was saying at the beginning, the victim assistance is really a community in this convention. It's very important that we work together. To close, on behalf of the committee, once again, I would like to thank all the panelists, the interpreters, and all of you for your active participation in this panel. Thank you very much. And stay connected, because in 15 minutes, there will be another panel addressing anti-personal mines of an improvised nature under the convention framework. So stay tuned and bye.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all of you at the panel discussion on addressing anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature under the framework of the Convention. I never thought I would open a panel with these three well wishes to everybody, but I think that's the reality of the COVID-19 world today, and I'm very pleased to be moderating today's panel on this important issue. My name is Sachi Claringbold. I'm the DPR to the Conference on Disarmament of the Netherlands, and I'm based in Geneva. I have the honor to moderate this panel on a topic that is also very close to my heart, as I was a previous chair of the Article 5 Implementation Committee. This year's APMBC meetings are all about the implementation of the Oslo Action Plan, as was emphasized by the president of this year's MSP, the Distinguished Ambassador of Sudan. So today's panel will go into the Oslo Action Plan and will in particular address how the Oslo Action Plan deals with this issue of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature. These type of mines, often referred to as improvised explosive devices, are unfortunately the cause of an increased number of casualties nowadays, as reported by the Landmine Monitor. They threaten our common goal of a mine-free world, and therefore there is work to be done to tackle this specific threat. So for this panel's program, we will first go into the context and background of the issue of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature. And then we will, so for that, we will start with a presentation by Lucy Pinches of the Mine Action Review, who will give us some context to the issue by presenting the global situation. And then the current chair of the Article 5 Implementation Committee, my esteemed colleague Jérôme Collard-Proulx, will, on behalf of this committee, address the issue in the context of the Oslo Action Plan, and will also look at the way forward for states affected by these types of mines. And then the second part of our panel, there we will explore some of the best practices in reporting, and also on the importance of disaggregating by looking at how the issue of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature is dealt with on the ground. And for that, we will first listen to a presentation by Mr. Mohammad Akbar Oriakil of DMAC of Afghanistan, who will explain us how his country deals with the challenge of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature. And then we will go to Hans Risser from Norwegian People's Aid, who will share some of his experience from the field, from an operator's perspective, of course, and explain the importance of disaggregation of devices and how it can be done in practice. And then the third part of the panel is that is where we will look into the available guidance on how to deal with anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, in particular concerning guidance on clearance, but also, of course, on reporting. And for that, we have a presentation by Mr. Rory Logan, who is the secretary of the IMAS Review Board and is working here for the GICHD. So before turning the floor to our presenters, let me give you a brief outline of the practicalities of the meeting. I mean, I guess you're all now used to this digital format, but we will have 5 presentations that each should last about 7 to 8 minutes. And that means that we should have approximately 15 minutes for Q&A at the end, if it goes according to plan. We have received some questions in advance, which have been shared with the panelists, and we hope that they can address some of these issues already in their presentations. And otherwise, please feel free to use the chat function. Of course, you can comment on the panel, but if you have specific questions, please maybe mark them clearly as a question so I can see it easier. It's quite a crowd here on my screen. And then we can try to address them at the end, and I will take some of the questions for the panel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Ms. Lucy Pinches. She is the project manager of the Mine Action Review and will present us the global situation by highlighting some of the countries and regions affected and by providing some general context on the issue. So Lucy, please, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Sachi. And thank you to the Article 5 committee for giving me the opportunity to present on this panel today. I think it's useful to start by a reminder that this is not a new issue. As a sector, we've been dealing with improvised anti-personnel mines, victim-activated IEDs, which meet the definition of anti-personnel mines for decades. For example, in state parties Afghanistan and Colombia. However, the scale of the use of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature is of note and has caused increased attention in recent years, notably the huge scale of contamination resulting from such devices by Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. As Sachi mentioned, increased use of improvised mines, as they're also referred to, has sadly caused casualty numbers to go up. According to the Landmine Monitor, in 2018, for the third consecutive year, the highest number of annual casualties was caused by improvised mines. And the countries with the high and increasing number of casualties are mostly those with improvised mine casualties. More recent use of improvised mines, however, is not just limited to the Middle East. We've also seen recent use in recent years by non-state armed groups in the Americas, in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially by non-state armed groups in the Lake Chad Basin and the Sahel, and in North Africa, such as State Not Party Libya. In fact, in Libya, the recent use of victim-activated IEDs, i.e. improvised mines, in and near people's homes was highlighted in a press release by the president of the Mine Ban Treaty, Sudan, at the beginning of this month. In some countries, such as Iraq, there's also been a significant contamination from victim-activated IEDs in buildings and more urban settings. Sometimes improvised devices represent the majority of mine contamination, like Colombia or State Not Party Myanmar. And then for other states, it might be a mix of conventionally made mines and improvised mines, such as in Yemen and Sri Lanka. And sometimes anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature only make up a small proportion of the overall mine contamination, such as, for example, in Somalia or Ukraine. I think we're seeing a lot of asymmetric, protracted conflict in many countries, as I said, involving non-state armed groups. And the use of improvised mines is unfortunately a reality and one that seems likely to persist. There's sometimes confusion in people seeing IED contamination purely as a counter-IED issue, separate to the obligations of the Mine Ban Treaty. But irrespective of who made or laid the improvised devices, be they non-state actors, insurgents, or terrorists, if the resulting in-place IEDs are victim-activated and meet the definition of a mine, then they're covered by the provisions of the treaty, and as such, contamination must be reported, surveyed, and cleared under the treaty. I think in saying what is covered, it's sometimes useful to make clear what's not covered. So what's not covered by the Mine Ban Treaty is time delay IEDs, command detonated IEDs, and suicide-borne IEDs. And that's really why it's important that state parties must not record IEDs just under the catch-all category of IEDs. So anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature and victim-activated IEDs need to be disaggregated out so that they can be reported under the Mine Ban Treaty. Unfortunately, as a result of new use, state parties which formerly had no obligations under Article 5 may now have new clearance obligations as a result. So, for example, Niger, it didn't previously have an Article 5 obligation and its original deadline had expired, but as announced by Nigeria in its statement in the Oslo Review Conference, it has suffered from new use of improvised mines. And we look forward to hopefully receiving information in its Article 7 report, and it's submitting an Article 5 extension request to help it stay within compliance of the treaty until such time as it can survey and, if confirmed, clear such devices. Cameroon may well be in the same position, and if it does have improvised mine contamination, it too should report these devices and address them under Article 7. And if suspected or confirmed mined areas are found to exist, request a new Article 5 deadline. Niger, which is requesting an extension to its Article 5 deadline this year, and who we will hear from in these intersessionals, should also ensure that if it has victim-activated IEDs that meet definition of a mine, that these are also included in its request and included in its Article 7 reporting. Neighbouring state, Burkina Faso, unfortunately may well also be affected by victim-activated IEDs that meet the definition of an anti-personnel mine, and should do likewise in terms of its reporting too. I think it's important to emphasise that Article 5 implementation is not just about adding or removing countries from a list. It's about state parties addressing the humanitarian harm caused by mines, whether they be improvised or conventionally made. As a sector, we really need to encourage and incentivise the correct and transparent recording of improvised mine contamination under the framework of the treaty. Action point 21 of the Oslo Action Plan is especially pertinent, and its corresponding indicator is the number of state parties that apply the provisions of the Convention to anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, so the number that survey, clear and report such devices. It's therefore really important that state parties that have this type of contamination report it under Article 7 of the Mine Ban Treaty and address it under Article 5. I know the Article 5 committee is going to be establishing the baseline of the Oslo Action Plan this year. I think Jerome maybe will say something about that. But and this is what the progress will be measured against. Mine Action Review is also going to be shadow monitoring the survey and clearance related indicators of the Oslo Action Plan 2 and establishing a baseline of Oslo Action Plan implementation based on the information that we collect as part of our Clearing the Mines report. So we really encourage state parties that know or suspect that they have improvised mine contamination to specify this in their Article 7 reporting, so we can reflect this in establishing the baseline of how many states are affected and how many of those are correctly applying the provisions of the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. There was a very clear presentation and a very good opening to this panel, and also a nice bridge, actually. Lucy mentioned the Oslo Action Plan and how it also sets new benchmarks or new actions with regard to anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, and that is exactly what our next panelists will address. So I would like to give the floor now, or it's not the floor, rather, it's the screen, to Mr. Jérôme Collard-Proux. He is the chair of the Committee on Article 5 Implementation, and he's working at the Canadian mission here in Geneva. And on behalf of the Committee on Article 5 Implementation, he will address the context, the Oslo Action Plan, and the way forward for states affected by anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature. Please, Jérôme, you have the screen.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Sechi. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your excellent work and the work you engaged in last year with the presidency of the Committee for the Article 5 Implementation. Colleagues, today I'm speaking to you on behalf of Committee on Article 5 Implementation chaired by Canada, and also including Austria, Norway and Zambia. Please allow me first of all to thank all panelists for participating in this discussion, and also Lucy for the overview that she's just provided. Unfortunately, it seems that we will continue to have to face the threat of improvised anti-personnel mines for the foreseeable future. Indeed, notably, due to this threat, we are seeing states finding newly mined areas on their territory, as Lucy has commented. The Committee on Article 5 Implementation and others have worked hard over the last couple of years to recall the place of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature within the Convention. This was borne in mind during the negotiation of the Convention's text. In practice, it has been stressed at the 17th meeting of state parties, notably through a paper presented by the Article 5 Implementation Committee, which is entitled Reflections and Understandings on the Implementation and Completion of Article 5 Mine Clearance Obligations. More recently, the fourth review conference has reviewed 5 years of implementation of the Convention and has recorded the following. Firstly, an increase in the use of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature by non-state actors, particularly in Afghanistan, Colombia, in Iraq, and in Yemen. Secondly, the significant challenges posed by anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature in the implementation of Article 5. And thirdly, the fact that this challenge may persist and possibly become more prevalent in the future. As Lucy has discussed, an example of this was seen at the fourth review conference, and that was the declaration by Nigeria, where they said that the country had found anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature on the territory, and that it was working to implement the provisions of the Convention, including mine clearance and protection provisions under Article 5, and also transparency reporting under Article 7. Given the importance of the issue of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, the states parties ensured that it would remain high on our collective agenda, and by addressing it within the Oslo Action Plan. Particularly, Action 21 of the OAP indicates that states parties affected by anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature will ensure that they apply all provisions and obligations of the Convention in the same way as they do for other AP mines, including during survey and clearance under Article 5, and again through the reports presented under Article 7. This means that affected states parties are obliged to carry out surveys to identify areas that are suspected or known to contain anti-personnel mines. It also means that affected states parties are obliged to carry out efforts to ensure the effective exclusion of civilians from these areas until the threat has been addressed. This is done through a number of measures, including context-specific mine risk education and reduction, and also the importance of these activities was emphasized during the Fourth Review Conference. Lastly, but of course not least, this means that states parties are obliged to address these areas as soon as possible within their deadlines. Therefore, it is essential that state parties report on contamination related to all kinds of anti-personnel mines, including those of an improvised nature. In 2019, at the intersessional meetings of the Convention, the ICRC published a paper on views and recommendations on improvised explosive devices falling within the scope of the Convention. This paper gives a helpful overview of the different kinds of IEDs and how they specifically relate to the APMBC, whilst addressing matters related to the amended Protocol 2 of the CCW. As some devices fall under the scope of both conventions and that quite a large number of states have ratified both, it is important that the obligations and commitments which arise from the texts are not contradictory but mutually reinforcing. So far, we have not seen serious issues on this front, but we would like to stress the importance of clear and disaggregated reporting, information management on devices that are found so that we understand exactly what kind of devices we're dealing with. For example, whether these devices are victim activated, improvised or not, in order to fulfill all obligations in an adequate manner. Beyond implementing the provisions, state parties are also obliged to apply decisions related to their specific circumstances. One example is the extension request process established by the states parties at the 7th meeting of the states parties, and a further example would be the decision of the 12th MSP with regard to situations in which states parties discover mined areas, including new areas, after the original or extended deadline to implement Article 5. This is critical as many states parties could be states that have never declared the presence of mined areas on their territory, or states that have completed implementation but are now faced with newly mined areas, such as the case for Nigeria. In short, the message of our committee today is that it is essential that states parties maintain, engage and apply these decisions. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jérôme, for your excellent presentation. It's also good to hear from the chair of the Article 5 Implementation Committee and to see how it fits into the Oslo Action Plan and how the committee intends to monitor the implementation, of course. And now let's move on to the second part, I would say, and that is to look at best practices in clearance and reporting on this issue. And for that, I would first like to give the floor to Mr. Mohamed Akbar Oriakil. He is the head of planning and program of the Directorate of Mine Action Coordination of the State Ministry for Disaster Management and Humanitarian Affairs of Afghanistan. And in his presentation, he will mainly focus on improvised mines as a challenge and mine action intervention in Afghanistan. Mohammed, you have the floor. Or no,
Thank
sorry,
you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Hello to everyone. As I was already introduced, my name is Mohammed Akbar, talking from Kabul. So in my presentation, I will just give you a view of the anti-personal mine, improvised nature scope in our country, and the mine action intervention. Next slide. So in current situation, we have almost 1,600 square kilometer of contamination in our country, which makes more than 4,000 hazardous area. Next slide. The breakdown of these contamination is mainly into legacy contamination, which refers to pre-2001, and the new contamination, which refers to post-2001. The legacy contamination, mainly it is anti-personnel, anti-vehicle of fabricated mines and ERW during Russian lead in Afghanistan, and the post-contamination, post-2001 contamination, it is mainly homemade or improvised anti-personnel mines led by anti-government elements, and also the ERW contamination due to ongoing fightings. Next slide. So considering the recent 12 months civilian casualties recorded due to improvised mine of victim operated and the ERW and fabricated landmine, more than 1,400 people are recorded as civilian casualty in our database, out of which 58% is due to improvised mine of the victim operated, and 40% due to ERW, and the remaining 2% due to anti-personnel or anti-tank mine explosions. Next slide. As most of our civilian casualties nowadays due to improvised mines, there are one or two examples of the civilian casualties on local vehicles, which resulted 10 civilian casualties in one accident and more than almost 50 civilian casualties on a bus, which was hit by roadside IED. So nowadays, at least one or more than one such civilian accidents occur on weekly basis, and this is very bad for us, and we are working to how to provide response to eliminate or reduce these types of civilian casualties. Next slide. So recently we have started responding the improvised mines. The one of the response is provided by humanitarian mine action, which in terms of humanitarian mine action, we only provide response or clear the abandoned improvised mines, which are pressure plate. Only the pressure plate type or the victim operated types, we are providing response for that. The military people who have their own EOD teams, they are providing response to all types of improvised mines, the remote control, the time, and all these 5 types of the improvised mines. Anytime they are facing on such mines, and it's on the road or anywhere they have operation, they just clear such improvised mines. Next slide. So almost 2.5 years back, in late 2017, we established a working group just for, we call it AIM, or Abandoned Improvised Mine. This working group is led by DMAC, and all mine action organizations have their representative in this working group. So there is a roadmap. They are working to achieve these activities. This technical working group conduct meetings by month at least, or anytime it is needed, and just follow these roadmaps, how to achieve these activities, and time by time. Next slide. So since 2 years back, we have had some best practices. For example, so far only one of our mine action organization, who is Hello Trust, they have the capacity to provide response to abandoned improvised mines. And the best thing that we have kept our impartiality and independence in order to not be affected by these military people. We hire deminers from the community in order to involve them in the mine action operation, and also it helps us to reach to different community areas, and they will provide support to mine action operation. Some non-technical survey specific for the recording of the AIM, or abandoned improvised mines, have been funded, and it was conducted to the most affected districts, based on which about 16 provinces of the country and 40 districts out of 400 districts which exist in our country, they are surveyed. And also we have integrated or involved AIM messages, part of our risk education, to be delivered to the affected communities. And in terms of prioritization, the recorded AIM hazards, which are in our database, they are more than 90%. They are high impact and very high impact. It means that they are, in terms of blockages, they are on the top of the list to be addressed, funded, and cleared. Next slide. So we have some success indicators so far. For example, we have already developed our national standards for the clearance, survey and clearance of the abandoned improvised mines in our country. And also our IPs or NGOs, they are in the process of developing their SOPs in light of the related AMAS, or Afghanistan Mine Action Standards. One of the NGOs has already told they have already started clearing or responding to these recorded hazards. The most important thing that recently UNMAS funded a project for provision of AIM survey and clearance for the TUT, training of all humanitarian NGOs or the mining organization. About 24 people are the part of this training, and 15 days is allocated for the survey training, and also 2.5 months is allocated for the clearance operation. These students then will be, they will conduct this training to their organizations, and after that they will have the capacity of, they will build the capacity of their organizations to provide response to the AIM problem. Some almost $1 million is allocated through VT for UNMAS for provision of the required tools and equipment, the required detectors and kits for the delivery of clearance and survey and clearance of the abandoned improvised mines. Another thing that some of the EGs, they are willing to allow mine action for clearing the AIM areas in their territory or under control areas. And also the government was also willing to provide fund for clearing the AIM contaminated area in one of the districts in eastern part of the country. Next slide. In terms of clearance and reporting, in current situation, the clearance is conducted by one of the organizations, and any types of abandoned improvised mine in terms of pressure plate found by their teams, it is recorded in our database as AIM. So far, there is no disaggregation of data, but our technical working group, they have planned to work on this because we are very in a preliminary stage for providing response to these types of contamination. The technical working group has planned to revise the reporting forms for the next operation, that during survey, the type of contamination should be recorded. For example, if the IED is designed for the anti-personnel or anti-tank mines, it will be recorded during the non-technical survey, and it definitely helps us during planning and designing of project for the clearance, that what types of equipment is needed and what will be the safety distance. So these types of items recorded during the survey will help us. And also during clearance, we will also record these items, found items of the pressure plate IDs as anti-personnel, designed for anti-personnel or anti-vehicle. So in current stage, we only provide response to the pressure plate IDs or victim operated IDs. But in future, so far we have not decided whether the program will provide response to any other types of IDs. It depends to the situation. Next slide. There are still some challenges. It is the last slide, I think. The ongoing fighting, still the oppositions or the anti-government elements, they are using IEDs as choice of weapons. The access issue is also a challenge to reach to the contaminated areas. And the capacity building still not conducted. We need capacity building for all humanitarian mine action organizations, and the lack of required tools and equipment. So although some $1 million equipment will be provided, but still we need some more equipment to have all implementing partners capable to implement the projects. And the requirement for a nationwide survey in order to know the scope of the problem in terms of anti-personnel improvised mines. And the funding shortfall, it is for all the program. Every year we receive almost 50% of the required fund for the mining operations. Next slide. I think that's all. Thank you for your attention. If there is any question, I will be happy to respond.
Thank you very much, Muhammad Akbar, and it was an excellent presentation. I'm very impressed what your country is doing to tackle the issue of well, you called abandoned improvised mines or improvised mines. And it's good to see that it's indeed work in progress. But I think, in particular, the slide where you showed like there is a difference between abandoned improvised mines, but also you have, of course, the IED spot tasks, if you will, that are part of the counter IED strategy that the military deals with, to have this distinction. You presented that on one slide. I think that's very clear, and that will probably, I'm sure, help many countries also with, understanding the issue and also finding a good way to deal with this issue. So thank you very much for your contributions. There are some questions that were popping up in the chat, and I also already saw that Shafiq already answered a question that was posed by ICBL, but we will come back to you at the end of this panel. So now I would like to move on to the next speaker. We will continue to explore best practices. And we will now turn to Mr. Hans Rieser. He is the Regional Director in Norwegian's People Said's Department for Mine Action and Disarmament in Oslo. And he will give an operator's perspective on why the disaggregation of data on landmines of an improvised nature is important and how it can be done in practice in the field. And I think this very well suits with the presentation we just had, where our colleague from Afghanistan laid out the issue they have with this issue. So we look forward to your presentation. Please, you have the screen, Hans.
Thank you very much, Sachi. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone out there, and greetings from Oslo. I'd like to start with, the reason I'd like to lay out why it's important and how we do it in the field. The issue, as Lucy mentioned in the beginning, the issue of IEDs and improvised mines is not a new one, and we've addressed devices like this in other countries in previous years. But what is new is the scale of the use in the Middle East, particularly since 2015 onwards, and that new scale of the use of these weapons has resulted in these extensive discussions that we've had in recent years on this issue and how to address IEDs and improvised mines. So in 2017 and 2019, there was a large effort by the IMAS board, secretariat, and membership to update IMAS to better reflect how IEDs should be addressed in the humanitarian context of mine action. I do believe Rory is going to speak more on that, so I won't go into detail, but in particular, important updates were done to the scope of the IMAS, to the glossary, to other IMAS modules, as well as the development of new IMAS on urban and building clearance, for example. And another one was the creation of minimum data requirements as an annex to the IMAS 510 on information management. From NPA's perspective, if a victim-activated device meets the definition of a mine as defined by the Mine Ban Treaty, then it's an anti-personnel mine, and it does not matter how or where the mine was made or how it was or who used it. It's important to emphasize we're talking about victim-activated devices here, and not other types of IEDs, such as time-delayed and command-detonated IEDs, which are not covered under the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. For us, it's not useful to define a device only by how it's made. We need to take into account the type of device and the context it's found in, and the purpose for which it's being cleared, and the purpose for which it was originally used. If I may share the screen now, I'll just share two examples of some photos. I hope everyone can see that. Sorry, there should be a picture on your screen, if you can see that, I hope. So the first one, this is a task in Iraq, Ramadi, near the Olympic Stadium, called Kilo 7. And it's called Kilo 7 because this is a mine belt, essentially a belt of improvised landmines that encircles the city, essentially 7 kilometers out from the town. And each stake in the ground in the photo represents an improvised landmine. And this is another photo of the same area, but what's key to point out is they are laid out in a pattern minefield. They are systematically laid out, and they were put there as a defensive nature, this mine belt. So essentially, while these are improvised IEDs, these are being laid out in every sense of the word as a landmine. essentially, in defensive patterns. And that's the point we wanted to raise. I'm not sure if you were actually able to see the screen. No, it didn't work. Sorry about that. But anyways, that's it. So for us operators, the term IED is actually too broad and general of a term, covering very different types of devices by the fact that they are improvised and not produced in a factory. Using the catch-all term of IEDs to report personnel mines does not separate out those victim-activated IEDs that also meet the definition of an anti-personnel mine from IEDs that don't meet the definition, like time-activated or command-detonated IEDs. Failure to report mined areas and efforts to address them under the treaty puts states parties in non-compliance with the treaty. Clearly, mines of an improvised nature are both IEDs and anti-personnel mines, and the confusion and a sense of disconnect in the mine action community largely exists, we believe, due to previous trainings from different schools, where we have, the staff, the operational staff addressing these issues, these items in the field, have had different training, and some were just not trained to be aware of the definitions of an anti-personnel mine under the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, or of the importance to record anti-personnel mines. And this is why training of our teams and education of our field staff on the latest revisions to IMAS is often needed. But we want to emphasize that this is not just a legal treaty obligation issue. How these devices are recorded also has potentially far-reaching impact on efficiency and effectiveness of survey and clearance operations on the ground. If devices are recorded in the wrong way, for example, as EOD spot tasks that focus on single items, that we might not recognize the entire area that is contaminated, or it's not treated from an area approach where we recognize it as a suspected hazard area or confirmed hazard area. So as operators, we need to be able to record the operational data needed to address the devices safely and to record these devices as AP mines under the treaty. And we believe it's entirely possible to do both, and we do it in order to meet the various reporting requirements we have from national authorities, but also donors and our own organizations, because sometimes these reporting requirements don't match. So we need that versatility in our reporting system. I will try to see if I can enable my screen again. Yeah, okay, let me go to this presentation. Sorry, let me just, so these were the photos I was trying to show earlier from Kilo 7 in Ramadi. And if I can move on, this is a table that we use for categorization of the weapons. And moving from the more general on the left side, the explosive ordnance type, to more specific names and models of the device. So in this way, we've sat with our teams and we've reviewed what information we need to gather and what information is useful for us. And the point of this table that we have here is that we are able to identify, there's two types of explosive ordnance that we come across according to the new definitions in IMAS. That's improvised and conventional. Once you've determined that it's a conventional, then you can go to whether it's a mine, whether it's UXO, whether it's abandoned munitions, or whether it's mines, rockets, anything else like this. If it's improvised, then it's an IED. But among those, there are different subcategories of IEDs that we've already mentioned: victim activated, command activated, and IED components, which is not really the whole one, but just the components, and then timed. And then within that, again, in the Iraqi example, we have very specific ones where we have improvised AP mines that are victim operated and are usually set off by a pressure plate or a crush wire, or we have ones that were produced by ISIS, which very much look like it, which we call the VS-500. We have other types of improvised devices that are not meeting the definition, and we have those here as, yes, they may be victim activated through a pressure release or a tension release, but these are sort of what we would consider more the booby traps inside houses. The important point here with this table is that we are able to disaggregate and filter the data by these various categories, models, and types, and then report back according to the needs that we have. And for us, going back to our example from Iraq, the areas where we are clearing and what we are finding in the field, 80% easily of the devices that we are clearing from the field, like those pictures we had from Kilo 7, are mines that meet the definition of the AP Mine Ban Convention. So that's the vast majority of the devices that we're finding, and that's where we want to record them properly. So last, if I can wrap this up, why is it important to disaggregate this data for operational reasons? It's essential that items are recorded correctly in the field and in information management systems to help ensure the efficiency and the effectiveness of the survey and the clearance operations, and also risk education. Both now, but also future in the line, we need to maintain that information management in case there's questions, and we need to go back to see what a lot of information management and lessons learned over the last 20 years in the mine action sector on the importance of information management, and that is equally applies to devices. Incorrectly recording mines of an improvised nature risks obscuring or our correct understanding of the problem, and could prevent us from being able to provide an effective humanitarian response to affected communities in need of protection. Some examples of that are categorization. If we categorize an IED, we risk tasks as I said earlier, an EOD spot task, clearing single items, and not as a SHA or a confirmed hazard area, and treating the whole area as contaminated. This could mean we miss items and have to go back to areas to clear them again. It could also result in incomplete prioritization as another one. And we might ultimately, it's important to identify the actual type and model of the explosive ordnance so that we can plan properly for the survey and clearance task. We need to know that we have the right equipment and the right training for our teams to address the specific threat from those devices in that area. And we need to take appropriate risks and threat reduction measures based on the specific threat posed by or risk posed by that device. And this information is also needed to inform risk education operations on the specific threat and risks posed by these munitions. We don't want to be giving them generic messages that may not match. And IEDs and improvised landmines, as already mentioned in the Afghanistan case, it's very important and specific risk education messages that go with those. So risks, we also risk international cooperation and assistance being misinformed or analyzing the wider problem by not reporting these devices for what they are, improvised landmines. So for us, it's vital that we get this right as a community, as the mine action sector. And we faced and collectively found solutions to challenges over the last 2 decades of the Mine Ban Treaty, and we are sure we can do this again with this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans. This was very enlightening, and I think in particular the point you were very clearly making, it was not only, of course, for Article 7 reporting that it is important. I mean, it's nice that it is a legal obligation, but it is a real reason for effectiveness of the mine clearance operation, but it also affects risk education, the way of reporting and correctly reporting and disaggregating the devices. So in the end, really, if we do this correctly, it will help us getting to a world free of mines. So now we go to the last presentation. I'm very mindful of the time. Actually, we are very short of time, and I'm not sure whether the next moderator will be happy if I go over time. So now, without much ado, I will give the floor now to Mr. Rory Logan. He's the Secretary of the IMAS Review Board and advisor on IHL and policy at the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining. And he will present the IMAS guidance that has been developed recently and that can assist states to deal with contamination from anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, as well as other IEDs. So Rory, please, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sachi, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone out there. I mean, as we've just heard, the use of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature on such a large scale has raised a number of challenges. But as we've also just heard, the mine action community is rising to meet these challenges. And this is true both at the normative level as well as at the operational level. The series of decisions that states have made in recent years also triggered detailed and intense discussions at the technical level on how these decisions can be effectively implemented in the field. I'm pleased to be able to say that this process has led to considerable additional guidance being developed and already incorporated into international mine action standards, as Hans mentioned earlier. I'll be providing a short overview of this process, and we'll also seek to highlight some of the main improvements, including in relation to reporting. In February 2018, at its annual meeting in Geneva, the IMAS Review Board, which is chaired by UNMAS, recognized the requirement to provide affected states with improved guidance on how to deal with contamination from mines of an improvised nature, as well as other improvised explosive and IEDs that they might encounter, whilst continuing to meet their reporting obligations, including under Article 7 of the APMBC. To this end, 7 thematic technical working groups were established to deliberate on improvements that were required across the IMAS framework. In an effort to benefit from the considerable technical expertise that exists across the sector, these technical working groups were open to relevant stakeholders that do not routinely sit on the IMAS Review Board, and to ensure that the deliberations were as inclusive as possible, the majority of the discussions were facilitated remotely. As a result of this considerable collaborative effort, comprehensive and standardized guidance now exists to support efforts in addressing AP mines of an improvised nature in line with humanitarian principles. And as some of our other panelists have already shown, they're already being used with positive results. I'm going to try and share my screen now, just to give an overview of exactly what has been done. Is that working? Can you see it, Sachi? Excellent. So this is the entire IMAS framework, and I just want to highlight a couple of the new updates that have been developed since 2018. As Hans already mentioned, and as I will speak about a bit more, we have a new edition of IMAS covering information management, IMAS 510, and that edition has also been supplemented with a series of minimum data requirements for mine action. In the management series, we have a new standard, a completely new standard on risk management, and that is also affixed with an annex that covers principles of threat analysis and threat assessment in a context where improvised contamination is expected. We have an entirely new standard on building clearance for use in urban or peri-urban areas, and a new document covering improvised explosive device disposal. This document is also supplemented with what we call a test and evaluation protocol, which lays out the various competencies that are required for operators operating at different levels on IEDD. In addition to these entirely new standards.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, I can hear you. I see there may be some problem with the interpretation channel in Spanish, but also I know it is you're the last speaker, but I don't want to hurry you, so please take your time, otherwise the interpreters will have a hard time catching up with you. So sorry to interrupt you, but please continue.
No problem, thank you. So as I said, the standards displayed here in green are new. I should also highlight that a look was taken at several other of the existing standards, and those resulted in substantial updates, which have also been approved and are included on the published versions. As I said before, I would like to highlight specifically the approval of a new edition of IMAS 510 on information management. As well as the recent inclusion of this standard of a new normative annex specifying minimum data requirements for mine action programs. The proper reporting of contamination that is encountered is essential, not only because it is a legal obligation under Article 7 of the Convention, but also because it is a prerequisite for accurately understanding the scale and nature of recent AP contamination so that appropriate responses can be developed. As Hans has already mentioned, from an operational perspective, it is essential to recognize the importance of gathering the necessary technical data in support of field operations. In order to ensure that survey and clearance can be conducted safely and efficiently, there is a requirement for detailed evidence-based analysis of the threats posed by this contamination. This analysis will inform and dictate clearance procedures that will be used to ensure that operations are implemented in line with IMAS quality requirements, thereby ensuring confidence in the outputs that are produced. The minimum data requirements themselves represent standardized guidance that clarifies what data needs to be collected by operators on all mine action programs globally. They have been designed to ensure that information can always be collected in such a way that it meets reporting obligations under the APMBC, CCM, and CCW, all without impeding operators' ability to determine any additional context-specific data requirements that they may have. As an example, I will try and share the screen again. I've prepared a slide that outlines how IMAS asks people to categorize explosive ordnance specifically. So as you can see on the screen, moving from left to right, it was developed as a series of tick boxes so that the relevant information could be collected about any device that is encountered in the field. And the first thing that is asked for is whether a device is conventionally manufactured or improvised. Once that has been established, whether it will be defined as a mine, booby trap, or other device as a grouping, or whether it would be unexploded ordnance or abandoned exploded ordnance, and then a series of subcategories which include anti-personnel mines. And the intent is that the forms that are used for the people actually collecting the data will also clarify the relevant definitions. It will also allow for cases where an item might meet more than one definition, which is something Hans also raised. And then, I mean, this slide just demonstrates what the forms will actually look like in the field. So what an operator will collect on either on a paper form or these days normally in tablets. Operators in charge of Operators in charge of surveying clearance operations, as well as national authorities, will need to be equipped with effective information management tools. These tools will need to be designed based on a proper understanding of the stakeholder requirements, including any operational and convention or legal obligations. Such tools also exist today. The information management system for mine action is furnished with the capacity to display straightforward and universal reporting formats. Now that standardized IMAS guidance is ready, it will form the foundation of any IMSMA databases that are established or that are updated globally. These systems will, of course, be bespoke tools, which will also capture any other technical information that may be required in the given context. So in summary, or to summarize, considerable efforts have already been made to ensure that the tools which are needed to address this new anti-personnel mine contamination are available to states and other stakeholders. And as a consequence, they do exist today and are readily accessible to the whole sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rory, for your presentation. And it's also good to know that, of course, apart from knowing that we will need to disaggregate and that we will need to report, there are tools and there is guidance to actually do it. And there is everything out there that makes us ready to basically implement what we have agreed on. So thank you very much for all your work on that and also presenting that today to the panel. I see that we only have 1 minute left, so that will be a bit of a challenge to do all the questions we have received. Okay, yeah, the question is whether we can ask for a few more minutes from the interpreters, if that is all right, so we can maybe do 2 questions, and I will really limit it to that, and then wrap up the session. So we can move on time also to the last session of today. And so I saw that there were a few questions in the chat that were actually already answered, so I won't go into them. So thank you very much for those who asked them and those who answered them. For example, the one by the Philippines, what is the difference between an IM and an IED? And I think when Zhao from the ICRC gave a link to one of the excellent papers of the ICRC written on this issue. So I hope that's going to be helpful for you all. But I have a question to Akbar. Which percentage of the improvised mines can be activated by a person, and are all pressure plate initiated capable of being an anti-personnel mine, or do we see that differently? Mohammed Akbar, are you able to answer this question, please?
Thank you for the question. Actually, we have recently started responding to these types of contamination. Only we are clearing the pressure plate IED contaminated areas. So based on our information from the field, almost 80% of the items or ID items which are discovered by our clearance teams, they are mainly for the anti-personnel purpose. And in terms of the area, they are led by the anti-government elements. They are close to the residential areas, gardens, or agricultural land, while some 20%, more or less 20%, the items found for designed for anti-tank or anti-vehicle, and they are mainly used in roads on the areas which vehicles can use that. So at this stage, we have this information. As soon as we have nationwide or nationwide operation, we will get more information and can share next meetings. That's all. Over.
Thank you very much. That was a very clear answer. And now we did receive some questions that were earlier submitted to us before the deadline. One by the UK, which asks about. So I would like to ask this to Jérôme, I think, in particular, the chair of the Article 5 committee. And that relates to IED's contamination in relation to AP2 of the CCW. And are there synergies in the approaches by Ottawa and the CCW? And are there ways to encourage the high contracting parties to the AP2 to also join or become involved in Ottawa? And in particular, I think how the clearance of IED contamination sits in relation to with AP2 in relation to Ottawa might be an interesting one to address, to also maybe briefly touch upon the differences. So Jérôme, if you would like to take the floor on this.
Thanks very much, Sachi. So thank you to the United Kingdom for the question. It's a very relevant question and has been partially raised, I believe, was partially raised last year during the AP2 meeting. Now, I'm certainly not an expert on this issue, and I won't try to give a detailed answer on the synergies between the two instruments, because clearly there are common points there. From the committee's perspective, and that is the perspective I'm speaking from today, the main issue is to avoid situations where one instrument harms the other, particularly with regard to reporting obligations. It's important to make sure that states are able to fulfill the obligations of each instrument in order to fulfill the legal obligations to which they have subscribed. However, as a number of panelists have quite aptly shown today, that can be more easily said than done. So what I would say is, with regard to the synergies, is that we might want to raise the issue of universalization. We maybe have some states who are party to one instrument but not to another, and I think the same reasoning is there as you would see on Cluster Munitions Convention, and we saw that this week with regard to states who are party to the APMBC but aren't to the Cluster Munitions Convention. So it would seem to me that we could draw parallels there. That's certainly the case. We can compare the AP-MBC with AP2. However, we have to be clear. There are a number of challenges and perhaps a bit of reticence from some high contracting parties to AP2 who are cautious when it comes to building on the common points across both instruments. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. And now, as we're wrapping up this panel, and which has already lasted a bit longer than planned, I think the last remark I would like to make on my side is I think it was a very wholesome panel, and somebody already commented in the chat that we were able to address the issue from various sides. So I hope you all enjoyed it and that you all learned from it. I definitely, certainly also did today. And in the end, what I always keep in mind is that in the end, if some person stands on an explosive device and then it explodes, so it's an anti-personal mine, then it really doesn't matter if we start arguing whether it's this or that. In the end, it needs to be cleared, and in the end, we need to avoid that it actually happens. And that is, I think, what it matters about. And that's why it is important that we look at the device as it is, and that we move forward dealing with devices that explode when people stand on it, as is the obligation under this convention. So now my final thanks, firstly to the interpreters for their extra time. Thank you very much for your excellent work. That's very, very necessary. And then also, of course, the Article 5 committee for putting together this excellent panel and trusting me to do the moderation. And the ICU for all the support. Sometimes I was looking on that side of my screen. That was because Juan Carlos is sitting to assist me here. And then lastly, and most importantly, the panelists, of course, for their excellent presentations. And also thank you to everybody who participated through the chat to make this session also more lively. Thank you very much. And oh yeah, the next session will be the informal presentation on the Article 5 extension requests by a few countries. And I believe it starts at 5:30. So please tune in then again. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Good. Well, we'll be getting started in just a short while. Let us then begin this session. Good afternoon to you all again. Allow me to introduce you. I'm Jérôme Collard-Prou. I'm from Canada, and it's my pleasure to chair this session on extension requests as chair of the Article 5 committee, made up also of Austria, Norway, and Zambia. Before I hand over the floor to member states who wish today to present their request for extension requests under Article 5, let me first inform you of a necessary change that we have had to make today to the session today, given the time constraints on the one hand, but also the broad interest that we have had from stakeholders to participate in this session. Given the short time, therefore, that we have, without delay, the three member states will present their requests: Senegal, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Niger, in that order. Then we shall open the floor to those who wish to make brief statements or comments on the requests. If we run out of time, then I call on those who wish to submit their statements to do so in writing. There will be a third session for extension requests, which is scheduled tomorrow, Thursday, at 3 to 3:45 Central European Standard Time. Without further ado, I will open the floor to member states, beginning with Senegal. Senegal, you have the floor. Senegal, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chairman. Chair, as those who've spoken before me, I would like to address to you and others our thanks on behalf of Senegal for having organised this intersessional conference of member states to the Ottawa Convention. At the end of its second extension period, which is due to expire on the 1st of March 2021, Senegal faces a number of remaining challenges as follows: to clear of mine zones with a known size of 491,086 square meters, that's 37 zones. Then 118 locations need to be surveyed with non-technical studies. And then finally, to clear zones of an unknown size. And taking into account the difficult situation in Senegal, that's 9 areas. Whilst we are enjoying a relative time of peace, the rate of progress in humanitarian demining operations in Senegal continues to be dependent on a number of constraints of a security nature and of a financial nature. To address this and to support Senegal's efforts in its mine action strategy, the European Union, working through the ISU, facilitated a national dialogue workshop which took place on the 29th and 30th of October 2018 in Dakar. The recommendations which issued from this workshop aimed at overcoming some of the reticence linked to a lack of communication, to bring parties closer together so as to facilitate the continual humanitarian demining process. From that point on, Humanity Inclusion, an accredited NGO, has resumed its demining activities in the Goudomp department, which is in the region of Sedhiou, as well as in the Bignona department, where it has led non-technical survey missions that continued up until March 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. In the context then of our third request for an extension, Senegal intends to continue implementing its national mine action strategy that has been underway since its accession to the Ottawa Treaty. The strategy was updated in 2018, and on the one hand it will lead to more direct involvement of the National Mine Action Centre in our negotiations, and on the other hand in greater efforts to contribute to the national budget, both in terms of the operations of the National Centre as well as in the other pillars of our mine action. We think that these two levers together should ensure that Senegal is mine-free by March 2026. The relative action plan can be found on the website of the conference. We reiterate its call for support to meet this goal. And in so doing, Senegal would like to address its sincere thanks to all of its technical and financial partners for their very valuable contributions to Senegal's policy of combating anti-personnel mines and explosive remnants of war on its territory. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senegal, for your presentation. Allow me to reassure you of the support of our committee in following up this process. Without further ado, I will give the floor straight to the next member state to present its extension request, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I would like to express your deep gratitude to all stakeholders who have provided support to Bosnia and Herzegovina over all these years or struggling with mines. Current size of the mine suspected area in Bosnia and Herzegovina now it's 967 square kilometers, which approximately 1.9% of the total of the country size. During the last extension request for 2nd July 2018 to 14 May 2020, Bosnia and Herzegovina Mine Action Center, Army Forces and Norwegian People Aid conducted the project country assessment of the suspected hazard area in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The project aimed to resist suspected hazard area in according IMAS, applying land release methodology developed for the context of the Bosnia and Herzegovina, defined the indicators from implementation of the new mine action strategy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and developed a middle action plan for land release. The final results of this project include the creation of the 488 mine suspected areas for future operation for land, the cancelled of the approximately 267 square kilometers. Mine and MSA are not be confused with suspected hazard areas. MSA are geographic area, some for which contains suspected hazard area to confirm hazard area to will be tasked to operation and subject on the land release. The assessment carried identification to a total of 1,430 mine affected communities and estimate at 121,000 resident of directly affected, which 3.3% of total of the number of the citizens of the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today, remaining challenges are to complete chapters of the national standards in according with IMAS, a final draft of the new rules to accreditation, to indicator to new web-oriented information system, and provide support of the all donors of implementation on land release concept. Bosnia and Herzegovina is mine action strategy 2018-2025 adopted in the Council of the Ministers in the November 2019, embarrassment, land release, and have 5 strategy goals, including strength, information, quality management procedures, transparency and communication to national and international level in order to increase the visibility, continue gain flares and expert locations suspected and confirmed mine areas. carry of the mind awareness measure to gender sensitive and respect device in order to reduce the number of the minds according to supporting safe and sustainable activity necessary for life and ensure the participation of all mine victims in social and equine grounds with others. The Bosnia and Herzegovina will be supported from UNDP and financed from European Union, created by new web-oriented database, replace existing system with increased ensemble of transparency on mine action data. Magma project, its assistant for action authorization is Bosnia and Herzegovina in increase transparency, improving playing capacity and implementation concept in mine action standards for all acts place for mine clearance. It built on the activities implementation passed the results to recording board of donors, improvised to human resource management process and mine action standards with Bosnia and Herzegovina. In accordance with Oslo Action Plan, mine risk education will be implemented through public information, education after population groups and through link mine action with affected community. In accordance with the law of the mining in Bosnia and Herzegovina, funds for implementation of the mine action in Bosnia and Herzegovina will be assured with international cooperation through budget and national institution and budget of other source. Based on more price understanding for the mining challenge gained during the last extension request in accordance with Article 5 of Ottawa Convention, Bosnia and Herzegovina requests 6 years extension from 1st March 2021 or 1st March 2027. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a successful organization and capacity to fulfill the obligation under convention, including number of the government, non-government, and commercial companies. In order to fulfill obligation under Article 5 of the convention with time 6 years from 1st March 2021 to 1st March 2027, in program will request approximately 168 million euros for this program. The finance plan, according to Operation Plan 2027, is preparing to according with realistic financial frame for mine action. Thankful, we continue try to describe number of the victims of compared to previous years with on the casualties recording Bosnia and Herzegovina is since November 2019. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and allow me to assure you the continued support of the committee. Now the third state party presenting its request extension, Niger. The floor is therefore directly to Niger. Please proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am General Youssef Maiga. I'm President of the National Commission for the Collect and Control of Illicit Arms and Head of Humanitarian Demining. Good evening to you all. Chairman, distinguished participants, allow me first to extend the warmest greetings and thank you for having undertaken to lead this work. We thank you for this initiative, the remote participation that is, which allows us to all be together at one time. Chairman, Delegates, as you are aware, and as a reminder, my country, Niger, has detected a minefield of APID 51 mines at the Forward Military Post, now the Inter-Army Battalion of Madama. In 2011 rather, this minefield was first detected. Then, in 2014, a technical study was conducted by deminers from the National Commission for the Collection and Control of Illicit Arms, the CNCAI. This confirmed the presence of some 39,304 square meters, and next to it also discovered a mixed mine, both anti-personnel and anti-tank mines, which it estimated at 196,253 square meters. This new area, which lies alongside the battalion on its south side, contains ACID 51 French anti-vehicle mines and is also laid with APID 51 anti-personnel mines. And this is an extension of the confirmed mined area. Chairman, we are, of course, fully aware of our obligations under the Ottawa Convention with regard to the ban on anti-personnel mines. And with this in mind, in November 2014, we deployed our own demining team, composed of more than 60 deminers, under our own funds. This has allowed us to clear mined areas and expand the Madama Inter-Army Battalion camp. And this is therefore a space that was reclaimed and enlarged. Chairman, our second extension request is due to end on the 31st of December 2020, and has aimed to demine two areas of 39,304 and 196,243 square meters, and those for the areas adjacent to the Madama camp. Two separate areas then. To recall, there are some 39,304 square meters and 177,760 square meters in the two areas. Now, the 39,304 have been completely demined. Now, the 18,483 square meters of the adjacent area has been cleared. So that's 39,304 on the one hand, a complete clearance, and 18,183 meters squared of a larger area, of which remains the 177,760 square meters. Chairman, delegates, as we have always done, we regret to note, and we regret to note again today once more, there has been no aid or assistance of any form to help us in these operations stemming from our partners. Furthermore, given the extent of the current contamination, Niger is not today in a position to suggest it will meet its commitments by 31st December 2020. This is the reason why we have therefore submitted our third request for what would be a 4-year extension, so that we can clear these remaining anti-personnel mines, God willing. Chairman, delegates, I would also like to recall that the methodology for demining this area is hampered by difficult climate and terrain, particularly where mines are buried in shifting sands, that is sand that is moved by the wind. The area is desert and is some 2,000 kilometers from our capital. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, notwithstanding the foregoing, I can, on the other hand, tell you that my country, Niger, is fully committed to completing the clearance of all of the areas contaminated by anti-personnel mines. You will surely agree that whatever effort we deploy, it will nevertheless be a challenge for Niger to complete demining, given the use of methods so far. I'm referring to the Madama area, which is currently being demined. That is by the end of 2020, 31st December. Chairman, delegates, I therefore once again call on both multilateral and bilateral partners. The call is to support us in the humanitarian demining process in Niger. Today, Niger is in a position where it has the technical capacity to work, to demine, but it still continues to lack the financial resources that will boost the number of deminers as well as allow us to increase logistical and transport capacity. Chairman, delegates, I would also like to inform you that this morning we participated in a high quality session alongside the Committee on Enhanced Cooperation, specifically on the individualized approach for Niger. And in closing, I would like to therefore sincerely thank the ECA Committee for all of their work, as well as the Article 5 Committee for all of its support provided to my country. My thanks go above all to the ISU for its ongoing support to my country, which has been unwavering, as well as the technical support that it has provided to us. Chairman, distinguished delegates, last but not least, I would like to wish you a very successful meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Niger. Rest assured the committee will continue to support you through this process up until the November 18 MSP. Let's move directly then to the list of speakers for their comments on the presentations that we have just received. I have 3 organisations that have requested the floor, and we will start with Mines Advisory Group to be followed by ICBL, and then Mine Action Review to follow. So, Mag, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all 3 presentations, and to the governments of Bosnia, Herzegovina and Senegal for their ongoing cooperation with MAG in relation to mine action. While MAG encourages states parties to make every effort to achieve the 2025 goal in line with the Oslo Action Plan, we acknowledge that this is not always possible. For Bosnia and Herzegovina, the proposed completion date of 2027 is more realistic in light of the extent of the remaining contamination and current rate of progress. Its achievement will require sustained effort on part of all mine action stakeholders. The ongoing commitment of national resources is to be commended, and we encourage international donors to continue, and if possible, to increase their support. Full adoption of the land release process in line with international best practice throughout the country will be critical if the revised deadline is to be met. We encourage the inclusion of detailed projections for land release targets within the request. The country's coalition partnership with Germany is a very positive step, and MAG would welcome a focus on addressing governance challenges affecting the mine action sector, as well as on efficiency. For Senegal, the proposed 2026 target is realistic, but we note that an earlier target of 2025 could have been possible with an earlier response from donor states. Currently, Senegal receives no funding despite several requests to states parties. We also draw your attention to three recent mine incidents that occurred within 10 days in the Casamance region, resulting in a total of 2 fatalities and 10 casualties. To prevent further human cost and in the spirit of leaving no one behind, MAG strongly encourages donor states to support completion efforts in Senegal. Access to mined areas is also a critical factor in Senegal's ability to achieve its Article 5 obligations. We are glad to see plans for a new strategy with regards to negotiation with armed groups and engagement with civil society included in the extension request, and hope to see these implemented as a priority. We welcome the inclusion of actions around gender by both Bosnia and Herzegovina and Senegal in their extension requests, and encourage further efforts to implement gender mainstreaming aspects of the Oslo Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mag. I request now the indulgence and generosity of our interpreters so we can continue, and I will also call upon the speakers to follow to be as brief as possible. ICBL, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, I will have to remove the translation. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Due to time constraints, we will keep our comments very brief and focus only on key issues and in particular on points that require further clarifications in all 3 presented requests. The ICBL full comments on the request will be submitted in writing. This 3rd extension request for Bosnia and Herzegovina is for a period of 6 years until March 2027. We regret that it is beyond 2025 and truly hope that it will be the last extension request required. Key issues that need to be addressed in the request include the following. There are different figures provided relating to the amount of land cancelled and reduced and the amount of land remaining to be cleared. These numbers need to be corrected. Under Section 4, it is stated that the 6 years of the extension request will enable non-technical survey and technical survey to better define the precise perimeter of mined areas. Bosnia and Herzegovina need to state clearly that the purpose of the extension request is not only to conduct survey, but to remove the mines from the identified confirmed hazardous areas and to fulfill its treaty obligations by the end date. An operational and finance plan is included in the request. However, the plan is for the period 2021-2025. Bosnia and Herzegovina need to present a more detailed operational and finance plan for the full period of the extension request until March 2027. After some 30 years of mine action efforts, with significant donor support, it is time for Bosnia and Herzegovina to be finally free of mines. We therefore call on Bosnia and Herzegovina to tackle its remaining contamination with a sense of urgency it requires and complete clearance as soon as possible and by the new deadline it is asking for.
This is Niger's fourth extension request. The state is requesting an additional 4 years until the end of 2024 to clear a very small area of remaining contamination, 0.17 square kilometers. The state has done very little clearance over the recent years, and the request presented today does not clearly explain how Niger intends to achieve full completion of clearance over the next 4 years. We need further information on the following. Niger does not provide clear updates on what has been achieved over the last 4 years. The state should provide a clear update on the amount of land surveyed and cleared. There is no clear information provided on whether the remaining 0.17 square kilometers has been surveyed, and Niger should clarify whether this is a CHA or an SHA. In addition, Niger should inform states on contamination caused by improvised mines. Niger needs to amend its work plan to include annual clearance projections and clarify the mining capacity that will be deployed. It should also consider and explain why it requires 4 years to clear such a small remaining area. Firstly, Niger should present a resource mobilization plan to obtain international funding and required assistance. A costed and detailed mine risk education action plan should also be included in the request. We hope sincerely that Niger will use this extension request process to get back on track. While planning and revising its request, Niger needs to immediately step up its mine action operations and to start regularly reporting on progress with consistent use of IMAS standards. This is Senegal's third extension request. The state is requesting an additional 5 years to address a very small area of 1.59 square kilometers. Recent clearance operations took place in 2017. 3 mine incidents were reported as recently as last month, and therefore the state must show that its political commitment to conclude its clearance without further delay. We would require further work on the following points. Senegal reports that 37 CHAs have been identified. The ICBL is concerned that many of them are in the vicinity of former and active military installations which are under the state's military control. As has been raised previously, non-clearance around bases raises questions about the good faith of the implementation of the convention and constitutes a serious compliance concern that the President and the Committee on Cooperative Compliance should consider further. Again, we would urge Senegal to focus its efforts on clearing the 37 CHAs without delay. In its request, Senegal has estimated an output of 0.2 square kilometers a year per operator. At that rate, the 37 CHAs could be cleared within a year and a half. In addition, Senegal has identified 118 areas requiring NTS and 9 SHAs. We urge Senegal to revise its request with the aim of achieving complete clearance of the 37 CHAs, as well as carrying out the NTS required to determine the remaining contamination as soon as possible within 2 years, that is to say the end of 2022. At that point, we would expect an update from the state on the progress alongside a work plan for the clearance of any remaining areas if needed. The request lacks a resource mobilization strategy and also a comprehensive plan for mine risk education. Both elements should be included in the revised text. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, ICBL. I'll now pass the floor to Mine Action Review.
Thank you, Jerome, and thank you to Senegal, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Niger for their extension requests. I will try and make just brief comments on all three, and Mine Action Review will submit full comments online to be put on the ISU website. So in the order that they were delivered, starting with Senegal, in order to fulfill its Article 5 obligations within the requested 5-year extension period, Senegal will need to very significantly increase the pace of its survey and clearance efforts. Providing more detail and clarity to support its third extension request will help it to demonstrate national ownership and commitment and make it more likely that the international cooperation and assistance needed to complete clearance of mined areas will be made available. We encourage Senegal to provide more information, in particular on what hazardous areas are included in the 1.6 square kilometres that it reports as remaining mine contamination, how much, if any, contamination is located in areas where security is assured, and what survey and clearance Senegal has conducted in and around military bases, when it was conducted and by which organisation, and whether there are still mined areas around military bases that require survey or clearance. Finally, Senegal should make clear what will be different in the next 5 years compared to the last 5 and why. Moving on to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mine Action Review appreciates the level of qualitative detail provided in its third and hopefully final extension request. However, the quantitative data contained in the extension requests contain many inconsistencies and inaccuracies that must be addressed. To assist, Mine Action Review can provide details of these via the Article 5 committee. In particular, it is essential that Bosnia and Herzegovina provide state parties with a clear multi-year work plan for the extension request, with estimates of the amount of mined area it expects to release, disaggregated by the land release method, and clarity and consistency on the extent of the mined area remaining at a specified date. In 2018 to 19, only 2% of the total amount of land release was through clearance, and the rest was through survey, which indicates that the actual mine contamination is only a small proportion of the total mine suspected area currently on its database. With this in mind, it is now essential that all implementing partners in all parts of the country routinely apply evidence-based land release in accordance with IMAS. With the requisite strategic planning, updated standards, good international and national demining capacity, and a sustainable information management system soon to be put in place, the element that will truly determine Bosnia and Herzegovina's success in fulfilling its Article 5 commitment is political will and national ownership. And finally, moving on to Niger, Mine Action Review appreciates that Niger faces many challenges in fulfillment of its Article 5 implementation. With regards to the extent of remaining anti-personnel mine contamination, while Niger refers in its extension request to the mined areas located in the northern part of the Agadez region near the Madama military base, no mention is made to the emerging threat of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature deployed by non-state armed groups on the western border regions of Niger, and we'd welcome more information on this. More detail of some additional information that Niger should provide is also in our full statement to be made available online. Finally, it has been challenging to accurately monitor Niger's progress since its third extension request was granted in 2016, as it has only submitted one Article 7 transparency report in the interim period. We therefore welcome Niger reporting clearance of nearly 18,500 square meters between July 2019 and February 2020. This modest outcome still represents progress after 5 years of extremely previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Merci.
Chair thanks the speaker. The interpreters have reached the end of their contracted work for the day, and we will now be stopping our services. Thank you very much, everyone.
Seront à midi, heure centrale européenne, avec une discussion d'experts sur la conformité coopérative au sein de la Convention sur l'interdiction des mines antipersonnelles. Nous continuerons avec une troisième séance sur les demandes de prolongation à 15 heures. Et les 4 États parties qui présenteront seront la République démocratique du Congo, la Mauritanie, le Soudan du Sud et l'Ukraine. Il ne me reste plus qu'à remercier une fois de plus les services d'interprétation, grâce à qui nous pouvons assurer le respect de la diversité linguistique dans nos échanges et dont le grand dévouement est sincèrement apprécié. Alors merci à vous et la séance d'aujourd'hui est terminée. Je vous remercie.